Now, I was on Twitter last night and I saw somebody going back and forth with somebody else saying that the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is not that big and the SEC is overrated. And I gotta strongly disagree with that. I think that the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is pretty wide, and it's a pretty big margin between the two conferences. And yes, these are the two best conferences in college football, and I already know what the Big Ten fanboys are about to say. Man, you only got 2.5 teams in the SEC. Take away Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. What are you? Okay, you still got Tennessee. Okay, you still got Texas A&M. Arkansas is a pretty good school. Same thing with Ole Miss. You see, the difference between the Big Ten and the SEC is that the SEC has way more depth than the Big Ten. And I'm not just talking about, in terms of college football playoff contenders. I'm talking about just overall depth. They got a lot of solid 7-8 win programs that are only 7-8 win programs because they're trapped in the SEC. If you were to take Arkansas and put them in the Big Ten, a lot of things change. Now, they may not be on the level of a Michigan or Ohio State, but I think they could be on the level of a Penn State if they were to move to the Big Ten. Put Texas A&M in the Big Ten and tell me they aren't one of the favorites to win that conference. Hell, put Tennessee in the Big Ten, and they at least are the third best team in that conference right now, ahead of Penn State. And for the people who want to take away the best programs out of the SEC, okay, you take away Bama, Georgia, and LSU. You take away Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State from the Big Ten, the Big Ten is nothing. Yeah, you got Wisconsin, you got some schools that got some rich history, but let's be honest. Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan have been carrying the Pac-12, the Big Ten, on its back. Outside of those three schools, the Big Ten has nothing close to the level of what the SEC has, in my opinion. I mean, you got Wisconsin, who on most years, they're a good bet to give you 8-9 wins and possibly have a couple of 10-win seasons. But, I mean, you look at Illinois, they've been down for a while. Nebraska has been down for a very long time. So it's like, if you were to compare the middle of the pack Big Ten teams to the middle of the pack SEC teams, the SEC would still win. And when you look at the results for what's transpired on the field, the SEC has had the advantage over the Big Ten. The Big Ten hasn't got through the SEC and the college football playoffs in how long? The last time a Big Ten school really broke through was Urban Meyer with Ohio State when they won the national championship nearly a decade ago. So for this whole conversation between, how wide is the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is not that wide. There is a pretty big gap. All right, and if you don't want to admit that, I'm going to say you're a little bit biased. There are a lot of great teams in the SEC this year. And if you were to put them in the Big Ten, they would be way better. The Big Ten West last season was a disaster. That was awful. Honestly, like, how many great quality teams were really in the Big Ten West? And that's what people say about the Big Ten and why they try to make this argument for why it's almost as good as the SEC. Well, you got a lot of solid teams. You don't got a lot of Ohio States, but you got a lot of mid-tier teams. Okay, the mid-tier teams in the SEC, most of them are only mid-tier teams because they're in the SEC. Put them in a different conference like the Big Ten, where they're not going against juggernauts like Alabama and Georgia every single week, and a lot of things change. Hell, think about some of these programs that are down right now in the SEC and how good they can be when everything's going right. Florida and the Big Ten, if they were to get rolling with how good they are at recruiting due to the geographic location that they have, and if they get a good coach with a great coaching staff, they will cook in the Big Ten. You want to know why? Because they will be able to out-recruit Ohio State and Michigan due to the geographic location being in Florida. So, when I'm looking at some of these Big Ten programs that have been down for years, Nebraska, when's the last time Nebraska was in the national championship conversation? It's been damn near decades. Last time Nebraska was competing for championships, I wasn't even born. The Big Ten and the SEC, there's a really considerable gap between the two. Now, it's not, you feel me? But it's pretty sizable. You know, the Big Ten has some solid teams, but the SEC has more solid teams than the Big Ten. I think that the SEC, when you look at their depth top to bottom, is better than any other conference in college football. I mean, you can go from your Georgias and your Alabamas and your LSU and go to Arkansas, who could easily be a 9-10 win team in the conference that's not as tough or as deep as the SEC. The Big Ten doesn't have the kind of depth that the SEC has. These mid-tier SEC programs are really great teams that potentially are just capped because of the scheduling, which soon will change, and the fact that they have other programs that recruit at a way higher level than them and just are juggernauts. Like Alabama, Georgia, LSU, take them out of the SEC, cool. There's still a lot of depth in this conference. Tennessee just had their best season in years. Like, we see how dangerous teams like Tennessee are in the SEC. Imagine how they could be in a less tough conference like the Big Ten that only has 3 teams. Like, it blows me how people say the SEC is so top heavy and we act like the Big Ten isn't. If anything, the Big Ten is more top heavy than the SEC, because you know who's going to win the Big Ten championship every single year. It's either going to come down to one or two schools, Ohio State or Michigan. And that might change, and it'll either be Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State. But with the SEC, though, you act like teams that have won the SEC have all been blue bloods. Let's not forget that Auburn has won the SEC a couple of times. They've also won a national championship. They've been to a national championship appearance. Like, we just seem to forget how much depth is in the SEC. Like, there's just so much meat and potatoes in this conference. Even looking at a school like Kentucky, South Carolina. Kentucky is a team that won 10 games not too long ago. Mark Stoops is one of the most underrated head coaches in college football. Same thing with South Carolina. If they were playing in a way less difficult conference, they would be better than what they are. The SEC is a juggernaut, man. Every single team you play is a B plus caliber program. And the Big Ten, though, I can't say the same. You mean to tell me that Nebraska is as good as a Ole Miss or even the Mississippi State? Stop it. Stop it. You're being a little bit biased, man. You mean to tell me that Northwestern is better than any other team in the SEC? I would take Vanderbilt over Northwestern. Like, there are some really bad teams in the Big Ten Conference. When you look at the SEC, there's not really a team that you can look at and be like, oh yeah, they're going to be shitty. I can look at a lot of Big Ten schools right now and be like, yeah, they're probably not going to be that good this year. And like I said, the Big Ten has a lot of quality teams. You know, I think Maryland is a quality team. Same thing with Michigan State. But look at how awful some of their worst teams are. Some of their middle of the pack teams are. Indiana, Rutgers are two of the worst programs in the Power 5. Same thing with Northwestern. Nebraska has been down for years. And when you get to the top half, okay, you get Purdue, who is pretty decent. Iowa, who is pretty solid. Minnesota is pretty solid. Wisconsin is one of those programs that's going to give you 8-9 wins consistently and pop off a couple of 10-win seasons here and there. But overall, compare this to the SEC, I don't really think it should be an argument or really that big of a debate. I think the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is considerably wide. And if you don't really see that, I think you're being a little bit biased. And you can bring up bowl results all you want to. Of course, there's going to be a couple of Big Ten teams that beat some SEC schools and some SEC schools that done beaten some Big Ten schools. But if we were to have a round robin, all these SEC schools going against all the schools from the Big Ten, I'm pretty confident the SEC will have the way better record by a landslide. I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of the mid-tier programs will eat up on Iowa. They don't even know how to coach a competent offense up there. There are people in that Iowa Hawkeyes fan base that are hoping that this team is bad just so they can fire their head coach. So I don't think that the gap between the Big Ten and the SEC isn't that huge. Like, it is that huge. And if you don't believe that, I think you're being a little bit biased. The SEC is the most dominant conference in college football right now. It has been the most dominant conference in college football for well over 2 decades. So the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten, if you're one of those, the gap isn't as big as you think, people, you're wrong. Go look at the Big Ten top to bottom and compare that to the SEC top to bottom. Not really that close.